This is the Reporter's Notebook, hosted by Elaine Shane.
Welcome to this entry in the DTN Reporter's Notebook. I'm Elaine Shane. We're joined today by DTN Editor-in-Chief Greg Horsmeyer. Today we're looking at the latest results of the Ag Confidence Index from DTN and the Progressive Farmer. Greg, first of all, give us a little background on how this is done.
Sure. Well, the Ag Confidence Index that we started about 7 years ago is based off of the Consumer Confidence Index. So we do the calculations the same way. It's basically a look at, and the surveys of farmers ask the question in a number of ways, but the basic question is, do you feel you're better off, worse off, or the same as you were a year ago, a quarter ago, different periods of time. So what we're basically just trying to do is get that pulse of how do farmers feel about where they are right now.
And how many are interviewed?
There's 500 farmers that are interviewed, and then the agribusiness index we do includes at least 100 ag retailers of various sorts.
So what was the overall index this time?
Well, the index, as most will probably understand, is at an all-time low. We are significantly under 2015. The confidence index, which is based on a neutral score of 100. So if you're okay, you're 100. If you're optimistic, it's above 100. If you're pessimistic, it's below 100, is now at 72, right about 72. So that's significantly low compared to that 100, I'm doing okay method or level. That is significantly lower than we were a year ago pre-harvest, where we were at 98, which is essentially 100. It's essentially in that middle range. The reason for that is really more about their present condition. So the numbers that we look at are how do they feel about today, how do they feel about the future, and then those numbers are put together to come up with the index that we use. Usually the history of this index has been farmers are pretty optimistic about the future and fairly optimistic about where they are right now. They've been gradually coming down as crop prices have come down and livestock prices have come down. But in the past, the level between how do you feel about where you are today and how do you feel about the future is fairly close. So that's what kept everything pretty close to 100, sort of in that even area. This current index, the big sort of jump at you number, is their present condition is 56. They feel that where they are today is a 56 compared to 100 being normal. That's significantly lower than what we've ever seen in the past.
Now that's the overall index. Let's break it down. What were you seeing specifically on the producers?
Right. So the producers themselves, that 56 today says that folks are fairly pessimistic about where things are today. Now the interesting thing, again, as we've looked over the history of these of the 7 years, is farmers are also always optimistic about the future. And so how do you feel about where you will be a year from now was a more optimistic 81. It's still pessimistic, it's still below 100, but it's very close to that 100 normal level. So very pessimistic about where we are today, optimistic relatively so about where we're going to be in the future. So, what you take from this when you start talking to people is, we know the crop is big, we know commodity prices are low, we're hoping things will get better in the future.
Are there other things that are influencing them to be that negative at this time?
One of the big numbers that we saw, we asked a number of questions about what they expect for their profits, where their input costs are going to be, those kind of things. One of the things that we saw that was significant was input costs. They are very pessimistic about what they think input costs are going to be. That tells me that and we've been reporting about this in other ways on DTN and the Progressive Farmer, they don't expect interest rates to change much, but they don't expect rental rates to come down significantly. We do know that land rental rates and land costs have come down a little bit, but they don't expect that to change. We know that diesel fuel and propane costs are low, but they don't expect them to get much lower. Input costs are still in that very pessimistic range. Things like seeds and fertilizers. We know that fertilizer's down right now. They don't expect that to get much lower than what it is today. And seed costs, they still say are relatively high, and those kind of inputs, seeds, chemicals, fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, are still at fairly high levels, and they don't see them coming down very far.
Do you see any differences by region or by, say, crops versus livestock?
Yeah, we usually pick up a little bit of a regional difference that's significantly different this time. The Midwest has been historically the lower number of the years that we've done it. Usually, if there's a region that's low, it's usually the Midwest. It's significantly lower this time compared to the Southeast or the Southwest. And if you think about that, if you think about the corn and soybean farmer in the Midwest, the lack of irrigation that you see in the Southeast and the Southwest, you would expect that those Southeast and Southwest growers would be slightly, still pessimistic, but still slightly more optimistic than what the Midwest growers are. And on the livestock versus crop farmer side, a very significant change this time. Usually we see in years past, if we go back to the 2010, 11, 12, 13 years when crop prices were good and feed costs were high, we usually saw crop farmers were happy, livestock farmers were pessimistic. When those swapped, we saw a swap. Crop farmers were pessimistic, livestock farmers were optimistic. Now, for the first time, we've seen, and again, if you look at what's going on in the marketplace, it bears out, crop farmers are pessimistic, they're way below 100, and livestock farmers are even farther below than that. So this is the first time that both livestock and crop farmers have both been below 100, and livestock farmers consistently below crop farmers. And if you look what's happening in the dairy industry and you look what's happening to the roller coaster that the beef trade has taken in the last 4 to 6 months, it stands to reason that those guys are pretty pessimistic about where they are right now and about what may be happening in the future.
Now that was the producers. What about the businesses? What did the index reflect there?
Yeah, good point. And this is the reason why we do these two indexes, because we want to compare how is the rest of rural America doing. How are the equipment dealers and the elevators and the fertilizer salesmen and those kinds of things. They typically throughout this period have always been a little more in the even. They've never been horribly pessimistic. Even when farmers started to get pessimistic, they stayed fairly close to the medium area, and that has borne through this time. The index for the agribusinesses is at a 90, which is almost in that middle, I'm okay, I'm not feeling really good about it, but I'm still okay kind of range. The big difference that we saw this time, it's actually up a little bit from where we were a year ago, not by much, not really statistically, but still right in that same range. Where we saw a difference this time is in expected sales to farmers. So we ask them about their profitability, we ask them about their input costs and how their costs are doing. They stayed fairly medium to slightly optimistic about those areas. The thing that brought it down a little bit below 100 is they're feeling less optimistic about sales to farmers. So they are beginning to worry about, will they come in to buy that new tractor? Will they buy as much fertilizer as they bought in the past? On the chemical sides, we see growers trying to figure out ways to be as frugal as they can, and that's beginning to bear out in the agribusiness area. Though that farmers have to spend money. I mean, they have to come in and they have to buy. They have to put the crop out next year. They have to buy diesel fuel. So that stands to reason that it would keep the agribusiness index fairly close to at least I'm normal. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep, thank you.
With Greg Horsmeyer, I'm Elaine Chain, and that's today's entry in the DTN Reporter's Notebook. Thanks for joining us, and have a good evening from DTN.
This has been the Reporter's Notebook from the DTN Progressive Farmer Newsroom.